Good afternoon, this is Aaron from LatinFinance here at the second Cumbre Financiera in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Here with me this afternoon, I have Alejo Costa, the head strategist and chief economist at Puente. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Aaron.
Just in the preview to your panel, which is up shortly, I'd like to get a gauge for investor sentiment in Argentina. Really generally speaking, emerging market sentiment, which you could argue on the back of Argentina's sovereign issue, has grown of late. Do you see that trend continuing in the short term?
Look, as you mentioned, right before the Argentina's issuance, what we saw among investors was really overwhelming optimism. Really, many EM investors are looking for a good story, and so far Argentina is giving them that good story. And the biggest question is, as you mentioned, is that trend going to continue? And the feeling that as long as Argentina delivers on the different targets that the government imposed itself, you will see some optimism among investors. Really, the biggest concern is Argentina, for example, on the fiscal side and the monetary side has different targets, both on inflation and the fiscal deficit. And the biggest question is whether they can achieve those targets or not. Okay. And the feeling there is that the biggest concern is economic activity. Sure. You need economic activity to achieve those fiscal targets. Because Argentina is doing something that in the past hasn't been done, which is to achieve those targets gradually. The fiscal gradualism is really the biggest concern among investors.
You could argue, though, that this is a case of been there, done that for Argentina before. I mean, they've had, I feel like this is probably the third comeback in my lifetime anyway. So would you say that this news and this sentiment was already priced into transactions?
Partially. I think it's partial. As you mentioned, really some analysts and I think mostly Argentinians themselves have become a little bit more cynical because they feel that they have seen this before and in the past it hasn't really been as successful as some people expected. I think this is the first time though that we have a government that is not coming from either the Peronists or the radicals in Argentina, a government that needs a lot of consensus to reach decisions. That might be a bad thing, but it's also a good thing in the sense that whatever measures they're taking is going to be long-lasting in the sense that it will be reached through a consensus and it will extend. Those measures will extend towards the next administration. And that's something that is positive from the investors' point of view. Okay. So this time it might be different. Like Rogov's book, this time this might be different, right?
So do you think, the start of this year, particularly in Latin America, emerging markets around the world, but Latin America specifically, was very slow in terms of new issues, in terms of equity offerings. It was very, very slow. And that's, it's no surprise given the macroeconomic difficulties that parts of the region are facing. Do you think a lot of investors were waiting for Argentina? There was this build-up right after the election last year, the lifting of capital controls, the relaxation of certain export tariffs or import tariffs. So do you think that this, Argentina is one, serving as a harbinger for change, and two, is it a case of investors have just been waiting? They've been waiting and they've been waiting to put their eggs in the Argentinian basket, if you like.
I think when you look at EM, in particular LATAM, what you see is that many countries, as you mentioned, have been sort of exploiting this opportunity during the previous few years of very low rates, high commodity prices to issue debt during those periods. And they sort of taking a back step in this year. And Argentina is sort of filling the gap of those group of countries that is sort of giving a possibility of a change, right? After many years of really sort of socialist measures, many populist governments, Argentina is really the first country that emerges as a country that is sort of coming back to more orthodox measures, a little bit more market-friendly, and it is sort of ahead of that change that many people are expecting for the rest of Latin. Okay. From that perspective, I think investors were waiting for that to happen across Latin, right?
Well, it's not surprising. There's been a flurry of transactions from various parts of Latin America of late. But I guess, what are the challenges now going forward, particularly for Argentina, from a fiscal standpoint, an economic standpoint? What are the most pressing concerns?
I think when you look at the challenges, of course, the first one is you have a legacy where you have a lot of imbalances on the macroeconomic side, but you also have really mistrust among many investors because of the regulations, because of the legal framework, because the possibility of once again, as you mentioned, eventually sort of taking unfriendly measures in the future. And really the biggest concern is how to give investors a sort of guarantee somehow safety on their long-term investments. And if you look at the different talks we have during today's meetings, really what the government is trying to convey is that they're going to give investors enough safety to invest in projects that go beyond really the kind of investment that you might make in fixed income assets, right?
Sure.
And that's really, so the biggest concern is how to kickstart growth. And for that you need investment, and for that you need foreign savings. And so the biggest concern is how to attract that foreign saving for the medium term, right?
You're referring to international investment coming in.
Exactly.
That leads me to my final question. What are some of the measures that need to be taken to increase foreign direct investment?
I think some have already been taken in the sense that they have dismantled a big chunk of the restrictions on capital flows. They have a free-floating FX. But of course, there's more coming, and there's different somehow obstacles that this administration is facing. And among those, really changing the regulatory framework is one of them. Reducing the fiscal pressure is another. I mean, this is an administration that is facing the difficulty of going through a fiscal consolidation while at the same time they have the highest tax pressure in Argentina's history. But you have to reduce tax pressure to be competitive, right? I think those are the main challenges. They also have to, as I mentioned before, convey the idea that many of the changes and the new policies they're pursuing will be long-lasting. Will be there in 4 years, 8 years, right? And that's what investors need to invest in the real part of the economy.
So it's about creating a sustainable kind of policy.
That's exactly right.
Brilliant. Alejo Costa from Puente, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arm.
And I look forward to seeing the panel shortly.